But for those of you that are here with us tonight, thank you for joining us for Wisconsin Veterans Museum's April movie night discussion. Before we get started, I just want to thank real quick the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support in offering these free programs. They do a fantastic job, and these virtual programs are going to continue. Once the museum goes back into full operations, we really like the reach that we get. You know, we have now a national audience. We had an event on Tuesday where we had a visitor from Venezuela. So we also, and we've had visitors from Ireland and England and France and many other places. So not only do we have a national audience now, but we also have an international audience.
Oh, cool.
And that's all it's all due in part to the foundation's continued support of us and these events. So, you know, I'd just like to say again, thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation and their executive director, Ms. Jennifer Carlson. They do a fantastic job, and we're really glad to have them on board. Chris, you've got a fantastic background there.
I was going to say the same thing.
Never ceases to amaze me, Chris, what you come up with. Oh, look, we're having more people join in. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Oh, somebody already got that one. Good. So tonight, as everybody knows, we're here to talk about Bridge on the River Kwai from 1957, adapted from the 1952 novel of the same name from Pierre Boulez. Although the film does stray from some of the finer points of the novel, it still follows it relatively closely. Directed by David Lean. And you might remember him from such films as Lawrence of Arabia, which is one of my favorites, Dr. Zhivago, Passage to India. Cinematographer was Jack Hildyard. 55 Days in Peking is one of the movies that I remember him from with Charlton Heston, and also Battle of the Bulge. Screenplay was written by Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson. But you have to remember that this is a time in Hollywood where they are going through communist blacklisting, and they're really pushing everybody out who is even remotely or considered or thought to be associated with any sort of communist movements. So Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson originally did not get any sort of credit for the film, and when it won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay, it was given to Pierre Boulez. Pierre Boulez spoke no English at all. He's a Frenchman. And so it was obvious that he did not write the screenplay because the screenplay is all in English. Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson did get their due credit much, much later. And if you are interested in that sort of topic, there's a fantastic movie, and it's going off of Netflix in the next few days, if I'm not mistaken, called Trumbo. And it is about screenwriters in Hollywood during that time. And
I saw that.
Listed. Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yes,
I've rewatched it several times. I really enjoyed it, but it just really lent a great perspective into how not only actors, anybody who had anything to do with the motion picture industry was being blacklisted at that time, and also the congressional hearings and everything that went around that, and even jail time for some of these. It was produced by Horizon Pictures, Bridge on the River Kwai, and it was distributed by Columbia Pictures. It had a release date of October of 1957 in the UK and December of 1957 here in the US. Originally, it had a budget of $2.8 million, and $250,000 was just spent on the bridge itself. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we get into the discussion. But its box office net at the time was $30.6 million. So that was a huge, huge boon for Columbia Pictures at the time. The movie stars Sir Alec Guinness, William Holden, one of my personal favorites, Jack Hawkins, and then as Colonel Saito, Sessue Hayakawa, which is a fantastic part as well. The film was shot on location in Sri Lanka. And I just really want to say how these older movies really stick with me. And I really enjoy watching them more than I do modern films because they endure. You won't see any production nowadays that's going to build an entire bridge that's going to go on location in a remote jungle spot. I'd rather do everything digitally now, and that's fine for a lot of films. But for films like this, you know, it really stands the test of time because it's all real. And we'll also talk a little bit about that as we go on in discussion too, as I have a question about how the director and the cinematographer, how successful they were in creating the realism of the situation and the setting. The first question I always like to ask is, how did everybody enjoy the film?
Loved it.
Liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Loved it.
I've seen it before, and I like it.
Nice, Kent. I must admit, when I first saw it, I didn't really like it very much. I was a lot younger then, though, and my attentions were always, you know, focused somewhere else. And here my parents wanted to watch this kind of boring historical war movie, and this is before I'd gotten anywhere close to being interested in history or anything like that. So it took me a few times viewing it before it really sunk in. And since then, you know, I could watch it anytime it comes on, whether I pick it up toward the end or at the beginning or right in the middle, it doesn't matter. It's just a fantastic piece of motion picture.
We watched it on PBS about, I don't know, 3-4 months ago. So, you know, it still has legs. It still has an audience that it'll draw.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it comes on, you know, regular TV, Turner Classic Movies. I don't want to say once in a while, I'd say fairly often.
Yeah, we watched it on Turner. We DVR'd it and watched it last night. One of the funny things that happened was that when my kids were growing up doing their chores, one of my favorite sayings was, as Sessue Hayakawa said, be happy in your work. And to this day, when I told my oldest son that we were going to watch Bridge on the River Kwai, his head snapped around and he said, be happy in your work. So it does have lasting power.
It does have legs.
Absolutely. It's always nice when you can tie in family moments like that too. It really speaks to the power of film and why we're all here tonight, you know, because we love these films. Watching them, talking about them, dissecting them. I wish my kids were here to hear that, because they would just be staring at me with the sideways glance. God, Dad, we're glad you didn't do that. I had other phrases that they didn't enjoy, but that's a good one. That's a good one, John. I'd like to start out with like a general overall question. What does everybody think? Was this a war film or was this an anti-war film?
Well, maybe anti-war because of just the absurdity of it. You know, that they knew they were building this bridge for the purpose of destroying it. So, you know, it's like that old joke about go dig a hole over here and now fill it back in, you know?
Yep. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I think it was kind of an anti-war film. You get to the end and you have the repeated phrase, madness.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, throughout, Clifton was the kind of the moral voice of the film, kind of putting everything in perspective. And by highlighting those contradictions and just the madness of it all, I would put it definitely is far more anti-war than anything.
I agree.
I'd have to agree with everybody else as well. I don't like to judge war movies based on whether it's a war movie or an anti-war movie. You know, we all have our feelings on war itself, whether it's necessary or not. You know, is it ethical or not? And a lot of those questions come up in this film as well, and we'll talk about some of those as we move on. But you can't help but get the sense that, you know, by the end of the movie, or even, I don't think we even have to wait that far, that there is a feeling that, you know, war can be, or usually is, absurd. And it's a very difficult topic to kind of move around. And as we go through some of these questions that I have, you know, some of these answers or thoughts might become a little more apparent. We start with the camp itself. And one of the first questions I asked is that when we meet Commander Shears, he's digging these graves as Alec Guinness's or Nicholson's battalion is marching in. And he gives this kind of mocking eulogy. And then he says, and he says toward the end, he goes, "I don't mock the grave or the man." What do you think that he means by this? What are his sentiments?
I kind of think it goes back to your first question about whether the movie's an anti-war movie. And that this is really his cynicism about the war coming forward.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I think that he wasn't mocking those two things. He was being cynical about the action of doing that with everything that's kind of that they're being asked to do, that they're in prison, that it's disastrous, and they're being told to do this thing that's respectful when there's no respect about anything else that's going on.
No, that's a good point about respect as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there'd been so much death on the railway that one of the ways I take it is similar to Lisa. There's so much death on the railway that at this point it's become, I don't know if commonplace is the word, but it's definitely jaded him.
Antipathy was the word that I came up with.
That's a good word for it. Yeah.
And every time I watch this movie, I can't help but wonder, and actually I think it's probably true. Chris, what was the Australian's name that he's with there? Weaver?
Weaver, yes.
They probably dug all of those graves, not just the ones that we're seeing them dig. And before they even get to that, as they're showing some of the credits and the camera's moving along, just in random spots in the jungle, you see 3 or 4 grave sites, and then all of a sudden you get to, the camp itself and you have an actual graveyard. And I can't help but think that, maybe Shears was idealistic at one point, like maybe everybody was at the beginning of the war. But after you go through so much and you see so much horror and so much trauma and so much death, and in particularly at a camp like this, where you're not even fighting the war, you're so far removed from it, you can't help but to just become kind of, just blasé about it after a while. It just affects you that way. You kind of get it, and I have in my notes here too, kind of like a sense of futility. What's our purpose here? We're not fighting the enemy. We're not, doing anything that's making a difference. So that was just kind of my take on it. And I'm sorry, I need to introduce this gentleman here, Chris Kolakowski. For those who don't know, he is our director at the museum. And so not only does he have a great historical background of pretty much all things World War II, but he has some literal connections to the movie itself, or at least some of the background of it. As I said before, when I was introducing the film, it is loosely based in fact. There was a gentleman, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Toucey, and a Sergeant Major Saito. They were real characters, real people who were in the war at a POW camp just like this one. And they were the real life Nicholson and the real life Saito. Their characters are nothing like you see in the film. Saito was, some describe him as a generous man. He would work with the POWs, and he would try to make sure that, as much as he could, they were taken care of for being POWs. And Chris, if I'm not mistaken, Toucey was not this obstinate, English, we're going to do things the proper way all the time. But what did we say? Your great uncle or your great uncle was actually Philip Toucey. So Chris does have very personal connections.
Well, he worked with Toucey. He'd be one of those private laborers that you see would be depicted in the film. My father's mother was English, and it's on her side of the family. And I actually had 3 relatives captured at Singapore, all of whom ended up on the railway. And one of them, my closest relative, a guy named Ivor Shelper of the 6th Royal Norfolk Regiment, he's part of the unit that actually that built the real bridge.
Ah,
and was there, and then later ended the war, going back to last month, ended the war in a POW camp in Saigon, as a matter of fact, where they, among other things, he would have worked the port, and he would have extended the runways of what became Tenson Air Base. So, which is a whole other story for a whole other time. But yeah, when Eric told me he was going to do this film, I said, "Oh yeah, I have a personal interest in this because of I think Eric just disappeared on us. I guess he did.
where'd he go?
I think Eric did just disappear on us. His internet connection at home is problematic, perhaps. So I see a hand raised, and then if you want, until he gets back, I'll show you a map of the railway and show you where the real bridge is and give you the quick orientation if
Okay,
anybody wants to
got
do that. Mike, Molly, I hope you guys don't mind. I figure that's a good way.
Sure,
to
no,
he gets back.
of course.
So, we had a question first.
Well, it's maybe, I guess, by the way, I'm Bob. Kathy just got called away. Our daughter called her right during this, so she's handling that. Chris, I wondered if you had ever heard of a World Scouting connection with the bridge and the railroad. I'm a big scout leader in the Madison area, and have heard this over the years, that in the late 30s, there was a World Jamboree in the Netherlands. And of course, Japanese scouts and English scouts went to this World Jamboree, and they learned a friendship song. And while the British soldiers were working on the railroad, they would sing that song. The Japanese soldiers that were at, that Jamboree actually, said, "Oh, we must have this connection," and gave them favorable jobs or treated them better because they knew they had this scouting connection. Have you ever heard of that, Chris?
A little bit, now that you mention it, I've heard that a couple places. I've also heard of connections where people who, Japanese who have been in the United States or been in Britain as well. That I believe one of the captains actually in the film is depicted as having lived in Britain for a little while. And that was true. That was true in certain places up and down the line. It doesn't surprise me. I haven't heard that specific story, but I have heard some things like that where there were people made, it wasn't all cruelty. There was some human connection that was able to be made because let's be honest, you get a sense of the environment. The guards and the prisoners live cheek by jowl. You're going to talk to the other person. You're going to find there's some element of just because we're human. That said, I don't want to minimize the horrific conditions. Whenever I'm having a bad day, I think about those guys, and I realize it gives me perspective on life. Let's just put it that way. So, Eric, welcome back. I'll throw it back to you.
I think it was Sato that said he had been in the London Polytechnic studying art or something, and his father wanted him to go into
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I couldn't remember if it was him or if it was that captain, the one they were bribing with the lighter. So, I did want to make a comment about Shears real quick, because remember, commander is a rank he had put on.
That's right.
Commander also is equivalent to lieutenant colonel. I think if I listened carefully enough, he may have been the senior officer present in the camp before Nicholson showed up. So here's this guy who appropriated a Navy. Either way, he's a senior officer in the camp when Nicholson gets there, and all these people died under his ostensible command. And of course, you find out when he gets to Southeast Asia headquarters, he's like, yeah, I'm just an enlisted guy. I borrowed because I figured officers would be treated better. And so I wonder how much that plays into him just being just completely, not only how he reacts to the grave, but the comment he makes to Nicholson about me, I'm just a slave. I mean, that's a whole, I may be reading too much into it, but I picked up on that as I was like, I wonder if he was the last senior officer before Nicholson showed up.
Well, they certainly don't show anybody else or talk about anybody else who would outrank him. But by the way he's portrayed, and especially the way Saito ran the camp, officers were going to work right along with their men. So I guess it really wouldn't matter what rank you were. You were a POW. Period.
You get kind of a premonition of him not being an officer when you have that comment by I forget at what point in the movie where he says, "You are not an officer and a gentleman." I think it was when he was asked whether he was going to tell Colonel Nicholson about what it was really like in the camp, and one of the other people turns to him and says, "You are not an officer and a gentleman."
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. I do apologize for getting kicked off the internet real quick. I was able to get back on rather quickly though, so that's excellent. I don't know where the conversation went in my absence. But if it's all right with everybody, I'm just going to continue on to the next question.
Sure. Go for it.
Awesome. The next question I talk about is about Saito. And you certainly, when he meets Nicholson for the first time, well, not for the first time, it's the next day when they're actually going out to work on the bridge after their day off. There's contempt and anger there at him as Nicholson's, putting the Geneva Conventions right in his face. But as the movie progresses, what other feelings do you think that are attributed to Saito with regard to Nicholson and the British troops?
I think Saito eventually comes to feel like a great sense of shame, like when he breaks down crying because he, his under the Japanese leadership or whatever, they were unable to get this thing done. And then when they finally listened to the British, things just kind of really take off.
Shame was exactly the word that I had, Mike. Exactly right. Anybody else have a thought on that?
It's also a certain amount of incredulity, particularly when Nicholson goes into the hospital and asks for volunteers.
Yeah.
And that's something the Japanese would do up and down the railways. They would, if they didn't have enough what they considered fit men, and their definition of fit was very different from the standard definition, they would go in the hospital and turn out people from the hospital to go work. And so the idea of a British officer going in there and asking for volunteers is, even fictional, is just unheard of compared to any other camp on the railway. I'm not saying it happened really, because I have never seen documentation that anything like that did happen, but he's incredulous that he's like, he's actually, Nicholson's actually asking more of the prisoners than I would have. And you can see that's some of his reaction.
Yeah, and even on similar lines, Chris, when after Nicholson is released from the hot box and they're having that meeting about, how to best build a bridge, Nicholson asks for some of the Japanese soldiers to pitch in and help. And he says, I was thinking about, 1.5 times the work amount as the British soldiers, but let's foster a healthy sense of competitiveness and make it the same. And it's just, it's little things like that really shame Saito, I think. And there's points where I'm wondering if it's on purpose. Some of the actions are clearly on purpose, but then others I can't really attribute to that. It's just him trying to be effective. And then one line in particular was Clifton's line as he was going to gun down all the officers when they refused to do the work. And he says, "Is this your soldier's code, murdering unarmed men?" That really kind of put him in his place. I thought that was a great line, and it really set the tone for, I don't want to say the British taking over, but they certainly, to a point, did take over.
So that actually brings up a question I had. So did Saito lose so much face, become so embarrassed that he was, are we led to believe that he's actually going to commit ritual suicide? What is it called in Japanese? Harikuri? Is that why? Yeah, is that why he's writing the letter home, presumably to his loved one at that one point in his hut?
I think so, Mike. Yeah.
I think so too.
Thought so.
Actually, I know the ritual. That is part of the ritual. You write the letter, you enclose a lock of hair, and at the appropriate time, you disembowel yourself.
There you go.
I,
Okay.
I don't think Saito had the courage to do that though. I don't think he would have followed through with that.
No, he threw away the knife.
Hmm.
He threw away the knife on the bridge. Remember, he takes it out of his jacket pocket and throws it away.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's even really losing face there. If he can't follow through on the ritual.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely.
Another important question, I think, we see Nicholson talk about how nobody's the escape plan. There's not going to be an escape plan, even though his junior officers are already formulating one. And he says, no, we're not going to do this. And then he talks about how they were ordered to surrender. So actually escaping might be, an infraction of his military code, and he could be charged for going against his military orders. What does everybody think about that?
I think that at some points he was just, at first seemed like he was doing things by code, but then it seemed like he was creating these perceptions and realities of his own.
Yeah,
and
agree.
And I think that's kind of, one step in the process as the movie went on, is that he just kind of gets into his own world, his own perception, his own reality.
Right.
Yeah, great point.
Do you think he was trying to maybe justify his own embarrassment that he had to surrender?
Could be.
That he was kind of saying, I wouldn't have surrendered, basically, but I was ordered to surrender, and kind of saving face there.
I agree.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
That's a good question. I never thought of that. Yeah.
I think he after the hot box, he was looking for some revenge, and he planned this out to have the not only the Sato, the British or the Japanese commander, but all of the troops lose face. So I think this was planned, and you can see as he starts with the planning of the British taking over the bridge, a little bit at a time. Oh, can we order some food? Right. This is going to take a little longer.
Yeah.
And then he had this in mind, and he thought if he could go into it slowly, that the Japanese commander would maybe accept it a little bit at first, but then of course totally took over.
Yeah, and that was a great scene too, especially toward the end of it, when no matter what Nicholson or any of his junior officers said, Saito's response was, I have already given the order. It was just like an automatic. He was just, by the end of that meeting, he was stunned.
Yeah.
Well, Nicholson adjourned the meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big, that's a big moment right there. That normally is not done.
I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting too, like the power dynamics, just of the visual image of, Nicholson was standing, commanding attention, and Saito was sitting down with the rest of them.
Along those lines, Mike, as well, if you notice, go back and rewatch that scene behind Nicholson out the window, you can see the hot box. It's not in the foreground, and it's not prominent, but it's back there. And it's kind of that subtle reminder of what he had to endure, what he went through, and now what he's doing. He's taking over. And Chris, maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on this. As I was, asking this question about, no escape plan. We're going to do our best to build this bridge. I started looking into, there's this always this perception that World War II Ws, it was a sense of duty to try to escape and get back to their friendly lines and rejoin the war effort. But I couldn't find anything, at least from the American perspective, I couldn't find any orders or code or anything like that that said that that's the way it is. Not until 1955 with the Code of Conduct of U.S. Fighting Forces, put out by President Eisenhower, that says, one of the codes says this, it's the duty of all Allied POWs to try to escape and rejoin the war effort. But I didn't find anything like this in World War II. Was there?
Excuse me. It was more of a general understanding. But the Code of Conduct really was codified after Korea because of the brainwashing, the movie Manchurian Candidate, because they had to give some sort of, what happens if our people encounter this again? But during the Second World War, that wasn't so much of a factor. It was more name, rank, and serial number. And then, you do what, you do what needs to be done to stay alive. And if you can escape, do so. The problem with where they are in Southeast Asia, and if you'll permit me, Eric, I'll bring up a map here and show people.
Yeah.
I have a map here of the railway. Here's the railway of death. Here's Bangkok. Can everybody see this? First of all, give me a thumbs up, Mike, if you can see this.
I see it.
Okay, great. Here's Bangkok, and here's where the railway started in the Thailand side. Bang Pong here. Runs 250 miles to Than Biuzayat here in Burma. Okay. By the way, this is the British cemetery. One of my distant relatives is buried. If I was to put it from here to where the Allied front line is at its nearest point is about 500 miles.
Oh my.
Burma is the size of Texas in terms of land area. It's longer than Texas. It's longer and narrower, but it's the size of Texas. So you're basically, think about that. You're on one end of, let's say you're in Lubbock when you're at Than Biuzayat, and the Allies are way over in Houston and Dallas. Okay. Now, all of that terrain that they talked about, all that stuff you saw, the aerial shots initially and things like that, that's the jungle right here in the mountains. You can see 3 Pagodas Pass, and then there's Hellfire Pass right in here. It's some of the most remote jungle in the world today.
Really?
And they really did a nice job, basically from Tamarkan, which is where the real bridge is, at kilometer 46, going
Myanmar
this way. From here up to about here, which is kilometer about 60, 80 on the Burma side, it's all jungle.
Wow.
But you saw that very intro where the train's driving through and it's this wild jungle and everybody's digging cuts and all this stuff. That is a good impressionistic look at what the work was along the rail line here. Tamarkan's where the original bridge was. Bottom line though is, let's be honest, white person escaping from a POW camp is going to stick out. Thailand or Burma. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that's just a reality of the situation.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, you escape into a jungle like that, and there were people that did try to escape. The longest, I think, lasted 20 days before the Japanese hunted them down, and they were diseased and half starved. The other thing is, and the Japanese did this in the Philippines, but they did this as well in out here to a lesser extent. In the Philippines, if you were grouped in 10, and if somebody escaped, they killed the other 9. If somebody escaped here, and this actually happened with Tusi at Tamarkan, because he concealed for 48 hours when 2 officers tried to escape. They got captured, brought back, and ended up getting killed. But they also punished Tusi, and they punished some of his senior officers. And so what it does is it creates this societal pressure, because you don't want to let your mates down. And so, do you really want to risk that? You're not just putting your own life on the line. You're risking other people. And that's something too. Saito should have, by all rights, punished Nicholson for Shears's escape. And that's something that is not apparent unless you know the story of the railway here. By the way, real quick, just some statistics, if I may. 13,000 Australians, 668 Americans, including 9 that I've discovered from the state of Wisconsin. There were over anywhere from 100 to 300,000 Asian laborers. You saw the ones represented there in the hospital, of which 1 out of 3 died. And then you had about 65,000 British working on the railway, and then about 20 or 25,000 Dutch, of which among the Western troops, about 1 in 5 died in the construction of the railway. So just to put this into perspective. So Eric, hopefully that comes somewhere close to answering what you were asking.
Well, yeah, and like you said, I mean, so not only if you try to escape, were others going to be held accountable for your actions, but then at the same time, like Saito says, where are you going to escape to? There's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
That's why there's no fences. There's no guards. Because you're just, hundreds of miles of jungle. And then, Shear's escape, I think they did a really good job of showing almost the futility of it. 1 in 100 chance. He was lucky to be sort of rescued by that remote village that he stumbled upon.
Eric.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta drive the storyline. But yeah, it seems like a futile effort. And even if you were to be successful, others are going to pay the price for your action. And that's got to be a big deterrent. It really does. But talking about Shear's escape, he does make it out. He does make it to this hospital. The hospital, the location of the hospital was actually a real World War II site for a hospital that they had. And as well, the headquarters for Mountbatten that they portray in the film was actually Mountbatten's real headquarters. What was the name of that botanical garden, Chris? Do you recall?
Peradeniya Botanical Garden. It's still visible. It's on one of the highest towns in the middle of Ceylon or Sri Lanka now, and you can still visit it today. It is beautiful. It is a beautiful. General Stilwell, when he was up there visiting Mountbatten at one point, described it as the air and the climate being like Yellowstone in the summer.
Well, and the cinematography as well, especially when they are in Warden's office or apartment or whatever, they make it a point to, what you do when you film or even take pictures is you really go off the rule of threes. I think we've talked about this before. And you break up the set into 3 sections. And if you notice when they are in Warden's office, Warden and Shears are off to the far right most of the time. And the rest is the panoramic view out of the huge picture windows. They did that on purpose. David Lean was a perfectionist, almost to the point of being maddening when he was directing and working with the cinematographers on his films. This film really set David Lean on his path to make these large-scale epics. This was his first film doing that. And then afterwards, you see Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. He wasn't known for this prior. And then so, having that view, it just speaks to what Chris was talking about. And a lot of the research that I was doing, it was a little frustrating for this film because I kept coming across not the sources that I wanted to find for the historical perspective or the movie making perspective. I came across a lot of sources for the travel perspective. This is still a destination to go to today. This is a tourist industry based on this film to go and see that location, to see Mountbatten's headquarters. And a lot of people do plan their vacations around going to this spot and using their tourist prowess to go there. I'd like to do that someday, to be quite honest. I just don't want to have to go through the jungle and survive like that. Maybe for an overnight, that'd be all right, as long as there's no tigers here. Which kind of brings me to the next point. Aside from the obvious repercussions of, Shears lying about his rank and how he got there, why did he volunteer to go back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm
Well,
kind of itching. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think he was pretty much forced because they knew he wasn't an officer, and they could, put a little pressure on him because they could have some repercussions. So I don't think he had a lot of say in
He
that.
didn't have any option.
I don't think he wanted to do it because he was having too much fun with the nurses on the beach. But
Making his martinis and
yeah, and having a good time and recovering. But in fact, at the end, towards the end, then he says, "Well, you really didn't need me then, did you?"
Mhm.
yeah,
So after it was all over, of course, he becomes the hero because I think the movie centers around him. But he did admit that well, you brought me back here, and really, it's it was a moot point because you didn't really need me. I mean, he was a good, he helped in all areas, but they wanted to bring him back so that he would be able to show them where they were, where it was, what things were happening. And of course, they moved the bridge by then, and it was, yeah. I mean, why would you leave that voluntarily? I don't know.
It's interesting how in the same way that Nicholson maneuvers Saito,
Yeah.
Jack Warden's character maneuvers Shears.
Mhm.
I found it to be an interesting commentary. Of course, it's probably Pierre Boulle being French, where some of that overtone comes from, but it's an interesting commentary on British officers.
that's true. And I just got to say, Mike, the pictures you chose for your PowerPoint, especially that one of Shears as he's being told he's going to volunteer. It was great. It made me giggle a little bit. And this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I've always been a Jack Hawkins fan. I just watched Ben-Hur the other night again for like probably the gazillionth time. I've always really liked him. And in this scene, as he's breaking all this bad news to Shears, just the look on his face, it just cracks me up every time. I just love watching Jack Hawkins. He's great. One of the things that I found really interesting when I was doing my research for this was a site that put this connection between Shears to Star Wars. And of course, you have Guinness, connection with Obi-Wan Kenobi. But they were likening Solo as a lovable, selfish rogue. He's got no interest in participating in the war anymore. But they bring him up as a classic mythology sort of motif of the hero with the heart of gold who doesn't realize it. And it's kind of has to be forced out of him. And I think that really fits Shears as well. I was really interested in this site. It really doesn't, we're not talking about Star Wars, but just that they made that connection and brought in mythology and was able to tie those two together. I thought that was kind of interesting and kind of a neat way to look at it. I don't know that it has, sorry, go ahead.
Well, Eric, I was going to say that the young commando and Shears kind of got along, and of course, Hawkins gets injured because the young commando didn't, knife the Japanese soldier when he had a chance, and because it was his first time out. But then at the end, Holden is showing signs that, yeah, there's the young lieutenant. He had the skills, but he didn't have the experience. And at the end, with the plunger and so forth, he ended up, finally, stabbing the Japanese soldier, and but of course he gets killed. But I think that using that analogy, I never thought of that. The young lieutenant and and William Holden were kind of connected a little bit there in trying to develop that young character.
I apologize for my.
I think there's a to play off Star Wars a little bit. There's a similar dynamic in another science fiction film starring Tom Cruise, Edge of Tomorrow, if anybody's seen that,
Oh.
where Cruise is assigned without his knowledge and against his will to the British to engage in a campaign that he doesn't want to engage in. Very much like Shears is here. Shears is discovered to be somebody he's not, and has been assigned to the British in a way that Cruise is in Edge of Tomorrow. And Cruise turns out to be a hero as well, like Shears does in this.
Yeah, that's a good connection as well, Chris, and that's a good movie too. If you have not seen Edge of Tomorrow, I would definitely recommend that. It's fantastic plot, and of course Tom Cruise. How can you not like that? We're starting to run a little short on time, so I'm going to jump into actors and characters, and I'll just go around the room real quick. I always ask this question: who was your favorite character and why?
I'll start. William Holden, just because I think he's gorgeous.
Yeah, he does make quite an impression in this movie with his shaved chest and he's nice.
Yes, he did.
And he is a handsome gentleman too, I must admit. Anybody else?
I'm gonna go with the proper British gentleman, Colonel Green, who keeps saying, "Good show, good show."
Yeah, and then that scene, William Holden had heard that enough, and then for for Green to just keep repeating it like that.
Well, I think the doctor has an interesting character to play in this whole thing. He kind of weaves in and out, but he's the one at the very end that says madness.
Yeah.
He's one of the survivors, and yeah, there he is, Major Clifton, I don't know, whatever. So he kind of weaves in and out, and he doesn't get a lot of trouble, his way, because he's taking care of all the sick prisoners. But then obviously when they take over the bridge, and I don't know, everybody, then they're asked, even the sick ones, to go and help. He just shaking his head.
Yeah, and Chris kind of alluded to it earlier. He's kind of like the moral voice throughout the film. You have all these very far-leaning characters in their actions, but the center, the kind of the rock, is Clifton. So yeah, that's a good point, definitely. Sure, go ahead.
I think Lisa's got something.
That was my favorite character, was the doctor. I liked how didn't he jump in didn't he kind of courageously jump in when something was happening to I think it was Nicholson, to kind of
when they were about to be all the officer corps was about to be machine gunned down, and he ran out there and he said, look,
right.
You can't disguise this. Everybody sees this. You're not going to get away with it. So he did put himself in harm's way. He even got roughed up a little bit too for his efforts.
So he showed courage there. And then when he was questioning like the reasoning behind the bridge, like, really, do we really want to build this so well? we really want to have this great bridge to be used. Are you thinking straight? Those were the kind of implications that I was getting from him. He was questioning if that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, exactly right, Lisa. And as a matter of fact, in that scene where they're having the meeting with Saito, and they're taking over kind of, and they're explaining how they're going to do this fantastically. They're talking about increasing the work rate of the British soldiers. And as Nicholson is describing that, Clifton just kind of looks over at him like, are you crazy? Are you seriously doing this? I thought that was a great use of the close-up in this film. A lot of great uses, but that one in particular really sets Clifton's character apart. And like Chris says, it makes him that moral person. Kent, how about you? Who's your favorite
Well,
character?
usually I go for someone more obscure, but I just think Nicholson is the like complex character that, you know, raises all the ethical questions and so forth that you come up with at the end. And of course, Alec Guinness is a great actor. I do like him. So yeah, I've got to go with Nicholson. He's the glue of the story.
Yeah, and we were talking about this a little bit before everybody joined us, you know, just as we were getting ready for this event. This was really, I mean, this wasn't Alec Guinness's first role. He'd been in a lot of movies before this, but this was the first role where he was really recognized as a great, serious actor. Up until this point, he hadn't had the kind of role. He did some comedies, some more lighthearted films, but nothing along the lines of this. And he didn't actually, he didn't want to be in the film.
Yeah, I read that on Wikipedia that in fact nobody wanted him in the role, and somehow he got it. I remember from reading that anyway.
Well, he wasn't David Lean's first choice, but once he realized that he could bring him on board, it took a lot of effort to talk him into it. And even after production started, Alec Guinness really still wasn't sold on the project. And there was one point where Guinness's family was on location for a little while, and David Lean had brought Alec Guinness and his family in to watch some of the rushes. And after they finished watching the rushes, you know, Alec Guinness thanked them for showing them, and he and his family left. And David Lean was like, "Oh my God, you know, he didn't say what he thought or anything. They just left." And a couple hours later, after he'd been talking with his family, he came back to David Lean's quarters or whatever, and he said, "You know, this is some of the best acting I've ever done in my life. I am really impressed, and I'm really glad to be a part of this project." So it took a lot to really sell him on committing, you know, wholly to this, which is kind of amazing. And then, of course, you know, everybody he won Academy Award for Best Actor in this film, and he's, you know, basically had been a household name ever since.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Eric. Related to that, William Holden had the lead billing spot. He was supposed to be the star of the film, from everything I read, but Guinness just kind of stole
Hawkins
it
get
away.
the lead bill. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I have argued this in a couple other discussions that we've had about different movies. We always talk about, you know, who our favorite character is and why. What about the bridge itself? The bridge is the main character, similar to
No, that's funny.
you know, Dr. Strangelove and the Bomb. And then Chris brought up earlier that Carl Foreman, one of the screenwriters for this, also wrote Guns of Navarone. And you can look at, you know, that huge mountain with those guns in there as a main character as well. So inanimate objects can sometimes play a vital role as being a character in the film. And I think the bridge does this as well. This bridge, Mike has a great picture of it right there.
Yeah.
They actually constructed this bridge. It took over 1,500 trees with elephants dragging these trees through the jungle. They did not use any modern construction equipment to make this bridge. And like I said at the beginning, this bridge cost $250,000 to build. They also purchased an old train engine, you know, that was used as at the end when the train is going across the bridge and the bridge blows up. They actually bought an old train engine, had it refurbished so that it worked. They laid an actual mile of track, and all for the purpose of having it destroyed at the end. So a lot of effort went into the bridge itself, probably as much as David Lean had to put into keeping Alec Guinness, you know, interested in the project. So, you know, I argue that sometimes we can look at not just people as characters, but also, you know, some of the inanimate objects too.
Yeah. I think on some of the other movies we've commented that they only had one take, you know, to blow up that bridge or whatever. You blow it up and you say, "Oh, that didn't look good at all. We got to build another one," you know. Not gonna happen.
And actually, you bring up a good point, Chris, because David Lean did not like the way the bridge blew up. It didn't blow up the way he wanted it to. He wanted the whole thing to kind of lean toward the camera and fall down sideways. And it didn't do that. So he was a little disappointed, but you know, like you said, they only had one chance at it. So that was it. Real quick, I want to talk about also the actors and the characters. And I asked what similarities, if any, do you see between Nicholson and Warden and Shears? And I'm kind of curious to get everybody's thoughts on them being traitors to themselves. Throughout the movie, you know, they're betraying their own actions as the film progresses. Saito is this very hard man who's going to do it this way. And by the end, he's completely backtracked on everything. Nicholson is bound and determined to build the best bridge ever. And by the end, he realizes that he's made a complete mistake. And then, of course, Shears wants nothing to do with any of this. And by the end, he sacrifices himself to make sure the bridge is blown up. So I'm just going to want to, you know, see if anybody has any thoughts on these characters kind of being traitors to themselves internally, to their own ideals and principles. And we get all kinds of philosophical now.
But one thing I would suggest, Eric, and I've seen this is true of accounts on the railway, is that some of these regular officers, long service regular officers, are thrown into situations where they are what they end up, their experiences don't prepare themselves for it. And so you get somebody like Nicholson, you can tell he's fallen back on the rules, he's fallen back on code, he's fallen back on a paternalistic attitude towards his men, which was his training. But at the end, he realizes the limitations of that and realizes that there's something he overlooked in the whole process. And his world got changed. The same thing is true of Warden. You see, you know, he's mission focused, technical focused. He views the whole thing a little bit as a game. But that philosophy of life, he sees the limitation, he realizes the limitations of it when he gets to the bridge. And I would say the same as Shears is much more cynical. But even Shears has realized, you know, you can only get so far on guile and luck, and actually being an officer is not all, from his perspective, not all that he was bargaining for. And he actually bit off a lot more than he could chew, as opposed to being an enlisted person. I don't think they would have tried to blackjack him back to Burma or Thailand if you know, there hadn't been that, they've been able to blackmail him with the rank stuff and the embarrassment that it caused the Navy. You know, so they all come up against the limitations of the philosophy that has gotten them to the point that they are. And how they all work it out at the end is, well, it's compelling. It's a compelling ending for sure.
I kind of think that traitor is the wrong term for what they were doing. I think that it's a situation where the crisis, as Chris was saying, shows the limitations of the rules, and that's when they dig down and find out who their true selves are. That's what you get at the end.
I will say, in real life, Tusi was asked by somebody about, you know, gently about possibility of collaboration, and he said they're going to build the bridge anyway. If we refuse to work, they're going to shoot us all and bring somebody else in. My job is to get the bridge built. It's going to get built no matter what. Get it built and bring as many of my people home as I can.
And you know, everybody has been, you know, everybody says this, and we've talked about it in this discussion. You know, what was he thinking? You know, trying to build the best bridge that he possibly can. But he does detail that. You know, he does say that this is the best way to keep morale up. This is the best way to keep men healthy. And this is the best way to keep ourselves alive. So he does have you know, some rationale that is sensible. For whatever, you know, faults that he does have in his actions, he is kind of looking at it, you know, as trying to keep his, you know, the best that he can for his men. And I guess with that in mind, I don't know, you can still fault him, but how much, I'm not sure.
Mind if I highlight what I thought was a lighter side of this whole thing?
Absolutely, Chris. And by the way, is that the French version of the movie poster behind you?
Yes. it is.
That's awesome.
That's neat.
Speaking of Kwai, on the DVD version of this, they have sort of it's almost like a Wikipedia kind of presentation as the movie goes along in the feature. And one of the points they make is that Kwai it's kind of a corruption of an original, I don't know, Thai term or whatever. And the Kwai means river itself. So what you've got is a bridge on the river. Go figure. But the amusing thing, what amused me, and it wasn't there very long, but when Saito and his staff are going over the timing of this thing, they're relying on a pinup calendar.
Yeah, I saw that.
And when you talk about
That was clever.
when you talk about something being a character in the movie, I thought of that pinup calendar as a character in the movie, and a garage in what, Elk, Ohio, winding up there on the wall. And the other character that kind of intrigued me, even though no words, no nothing, was the guy who fanned, who was running.
What the heck?
Just seems so anomalous, but also so perfect for the whole scene.
Yeah, just sitting there the
As
whole
long as
time,
we're-
just pulling that cord.
As long as we're laughing here, we're also big fans of the movie Spaceballs. So
Oh,
that music
The music, yeah,
comes right into Spaceballs also.
the whistling Colonel Bogey or whatever is it's parodied by so many movies, but we love it in Space.
You know, there's been, since that movie came out, there's been so many references to it, culturally, cinematically, you know, and that's another reason why this movie still stands as, you know, as fantastic it is. It still stands the test of time, not only because of the greatness of it, but how often it's been referenced, and particularly I think it's called Captain Bogey's March.
Yeah.
Colonel Bogey,
And-
Colonel Bogey.
Colonel Bogey, yes.
Yep.
And the lyrics to that are, they wanted them singing it as they came in, but they said, no, we can't have them singing those lyrics and still have the rating that we want. They're particularly lewd, especially when they're talking about Hitler and Goebbels. If you want to look those up, you're more than welcome. But
Okay, I
yeah,
will.
absolutely. That whistling, that theme has been a standard for a lot ever since this film came out.
It also made the composer's widow fairly wealthy after it became a hit as a result of the movie.
I didn't know that. They trademarked it and made money off it. All right, folks. Well, once again, I have more notes than I have time. I guess that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
But we are after 8 o'clock. I do want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Please join us again next month. We are going to be talking about a movie that I haven't seen yet. So I'm really interested in watching it and getting a sense of it. Sand Pebbles, with Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people tell me that it's fantastic and I really need to watch it. I just haven't had the opportunity yet. So I'm really looking forward to next month's discussion. I hope to see everybody back then. And once again, thank you for joining us tonight. Chris, thanks for all your perspectives, especially as it relates to your family history. It's always wonderful to have those details to bring to the discussion itself. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. If you're in the Madison area, we're supposed to have wonderful weather, so please enjoy it.